and welcome to the 495. I'm your host, Doug Sparks, editor-in-chief of Merrimack Valley Magazine. Lou, how are you doing?
Doing very well today, doing very well.
You know, I feel my head's already kind of spinning a little bit because we were talking with our guest about TikTok.
Yeah.
And now I'm already thinking like, wow, you know, because I'm reluctant. I'm reluctant to have some other type of social media that I'm going to pay attention to. I know it's a time hole. And then I'm also like a little crotchety. I'm a little stubborn. Like, you know what I like? I like the Muppet Show. I have Disney Plus because I have kids, and we get to watch the Muppet Show. And to me, that's amazing. I watch a Muppet Show. And the Muppets are amazing. Not from some technical. I understand it's just, foam puppets and everything. But there was just stuff going on in the Muppet Show that was just pretty amazing and funny, and just the how quick it was and how innovative. It still feels innovative to me, and in a way like that, like early science fiction feels innovative to me. Like even like Edgar Rice Burroughs, like the early science fiction. I love that stuff. I like getting into that world, and the contemporary science fiction doesn't have that same sense of like awe and wonder to me.
As we were talking before the show, TikTok is very innovative.
Yeah.
It's just the stuff they're doing is you just go, wow.
Well, this is what I hear, and I get in my wife. I don't think she's listening, but she sends me these TikTok videos all the time, and I always ignore them.
Yeah.
And I know they're fun. I know there's something there, and partly I'm just scared. I'm scared to like have some other thing to distract me from all these other things that I want to be doing.
Might be sound in this case because, again, as you mentioned, it's a time suck.
Yeah.
You just start and 45 minutes of your day is gone.
Yeah, but also, who knows where it goes? I mean, Instagram is kind of a time hole too, but you learn things. You like pick up on, if you're into writing, you're into art, you're into photography, you're into different things. You learn things. You let it's a way to let ideas percolate and incubate, and there's something more to it than just like
But you know what?
Beware of the technology.
There's also the hidden gem, and this is what people don't get about video games, I don't think. There's the hidden gem. You're in a video game, you are present. Yeah. You're just there, and the whole noise floor drops around you for a while, and for however long you play, you get a little break from all that. TikTok's kind of the same way.
Yeah.
Everything just goes away.
Yeah, I'm not wired for it.
Yeah.
I'm not wired for it, and it's for the same reason I'm not wired for video games, because I like them too much. Like I played Batman Arkham Asylum. I remember getting that, and I knew that was the end of video games, because I was just in that world. I didn't want to stand up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I had coffee next to me. I think I even had like the coffee machine next to me, so I could just never ever have to move.
There you go. Yeah.
From playing Batman Arkham Asylum, and my wife was not my wife at the time. Karen came into the room and said, "You know what? This is not your hobby. This is too. You were.
Let
this
it go.
This is not healthy for you.
Step back, Doug.
Yeah, go back to reading the old poets. Our guest today, and we'll probably pick up some of these themes. Our guest today is Karen Jerzyk. She's a photographer who lives in Manchester, New Hampshire. If you've ever been to Hive Forge, which is in Salem, but in terms of the Merrimack Valley, it's down in Lowell, Mass. at Mill Number 5. Maybe you've seen her work. Karen, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. How are you both doing?
Doing great. I am doing great, and I feel like there's this kind of, and I don't know if I'm kidding myself, I feel we're kind of approaching the end of the pandemic. There's this.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, it's hopeful.
Yeah.
It's weird because when it first started, it was that no one knows what's happening, and how bad it's going to be. And, some people were like, oh, in a few weeks. It's funny with like Facebook on this day and all that stuff, kind of looking back at like my posts and other people's posts. But yeah, kind of looking at that whole, like the evolution of this all like starting and kind of like growing. But no, it feels better.
Yeah.
I think. It's like a weight has been lifted a little.
Sure. And the worst is going to be if there's some other wave, right? Because I have that feeling, and I know I'm not the only one. Because if I go into like a coffee shop or something, there's still not that many people in there. There's still everybody's socially distanced and everything. But there's this kind of vibe of like people are getting ready to crack the champagne, and the party's coming. The party's coming.
Yeah. I mean, I'm extremely introverted. Like I don't go out that much. Like I'm not a go to a bar person or really go to a party person. But man, like I just want like barbecues and like some sort of party. It's weird. I mean, yeah, for even me, like I got cabin fever pretty bad.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm introverted, but introversion doesn't mean you just want to be like a hermit or something. You still need to connect with people, and it got to be too much, especially with kind of a cold winter. And then we had that crazy cold yesterday. I don't know what Manchester
Oh
was
yeah,
like.
and the wind.
Did you have the wind blowing and everything?
Yep.
It felt like apocalyptic and
Yeah,
strange.
we had to wire my neighbor's fence back up. She actually has a winter home in Florida, so we were like, oh, we might as well fix the fence for her.
Well, that was nice. So, for people who haven't seen your work, how would you describe what you do?
I always have trouble with that. Because usually people are like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" And I'm like, "I'm a photographer," and they ask what kind, obviously, and I never know what to say. I want to say kind of like fine art, and then below that, as like a subcategory, probably like surreal fine art. You're showing an astronaut photo there. So I love sci-fi. You were talking about sci-fi before. You actually brought up well, you brought up the Muppets. One of my earliest memories. So I was an 80s kid. I was born in 81, and I remember my mother used to bring me to the movies like all the time, and seeing like the Dark Crystal and like Labyrinth. I was like, oh my God, like it was mind-blowing as a kid, but like you said, even, some movies did not surpass the test of time at all, especially from the 80s.
Yeah.
But even watching that stuff nowadays, I'm like, wow, this is insane. Like how they did this.
I think Dark Crystal holds up. I did watch it. I didn't care for the kind of reboot thing they did on Netflix. I don't know if you saw that. But
yes,
the original still has a soul or like a sense or a spirit or something to it. And there's this kind of like, whoa, like they were just dealing with the strangest stuff thematically, and it's colorful. It just looks good, and the characters.
Yeah, and just like the backstory too. It's not just like, oh, we're just gonna throw a bunch of weird characters in, and it's almost like Star Wars where the backstory is insane. About the different like species and like the different lands, and I love stuff like that.
Yeah. So speaking of, because you bring it up, speaking of sci-fi and also describing your work, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the science fiction aspect. I wanted to see how much of that is conscious, and there's an element of it too that reminds me of the writer who's now used to be obscure, but he influences everybody now, Philip K. Dick.
Yes. Who wrote, do androids dream of electric sheep?
Yeah, and there's something in his stuff. There's a sense of sometimes kind of isolation and quiet and desolation, but there's also this sort of mixing of like I feel like when I look at some of your photographs, it's Chinatown, but I don't know if it's San Francisco Chinatown, and I don't know if it's London Chinatown, and I don't know if it's like Lawrence or like a Chinese restaurant in Lawrence. And I can't tell whether it's the 80s or the 1950s, or like there's this kind of blurring of regions in time. Like it's a little bit outside time in a way that I see in Philip K. Dick. Is that there? Is that intentional?
Yeah, that's really intentional. I remember once another artist I know, he said he described my work as future past, and I was like, yeah, like before I even really realized I was doing it. And I think that started with me like going into like abandoned homes, and some people, they would just up and leave their homes like in the 70s or 80s, but it looks like in a lot of those houses that they were there since like the 30s or 40s. So I got really inspired by that, because it's like when you go into a space like that, some people don't throw away all their furniture that they had in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s up until they leave, even in present day when they leave. So it's like I would go into these spaces and see like the melding of all these like time period, like different TVs and different furniture. And I got really inspired by that. I just like different, I like when people are like, oh, what's your favorite like era? If you had to choose one, not necessarily that I lived in, obviously. And I can't say. I get inspiration from all of them, even the 20s, the 30s. Like in the 30s, you had like the rubber hose cartoons that were really popular, and I'm really into that.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
So it was like a style of cartoons. I would say like Steamboat Willie, Mickey Mouse is considered rubber hose.
Oh, I see. It's like
yes, exactly. There's that Cab Calloway one that he sang. I think it's the Saint something Infirmary Blues. I can't remember what
St.
it
James
was, but
Infirmary.
it's like a ghost, and yeah, the arms are like exactly what you said. But there's a video game out that came out a few years ago called Cuphead, and I'm obsessed with it. But they redid Rubber Hose style, but it's like super colorful, and I'm like, oh man, if that was a cartoon, I'd watch it religiously, you know. But yeah, I get a lot of inspiration from like pop culture like that too, you know. It's just bits and pieces of stuff sometimes that people wouldn't even, you know, expect probably that I get inspiration from.
Like what?
Like cartoons.
Yeah.
Cartoons, like I love looking at paintings, like any kind of paintings, because for me the challenge is how can I do something like that, like maybe a specific effect or whatnot. How do I do something like that but make it real? Because I don't use a lot of Photoshop, and that's something I have to explain to people a lot, because they either think my photos are just straight up paintings, or they think I'm, you know, using Photoshop somehow. Like a lot of people think I'm like Photoshopping the subject into wherever I was, but that's not the case. Like I either build sets or I find these places, you know, wherever. So yeah, it's just like practical effects and stuff are really important to me. So I like the challenge of trying to take something that seems like it would be impossible in the real world and making it possible, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I was just curious about how much processing, because there's a lot of color. There's all this, you know, kind of bold imagery and stuff, you know, like you said, where it's like, did you Photoshop something in, or did you go and like kind of build a set, almost like a like movie set? Do you do that because that's your temperament? You don't want to be Photoshopping, or it's like, did that naturally evolve?
Yeah, I mean, well,
Why take
going
that
back to
approach? Because
like,
to a lot of people, it would seem like the more difficult path.
right, yeah, but I feel like you can tell, you know, if something's Photoshop too. And again, like I'm obvious, I'm gonna probably bring up movies a ton of times, but I'm very inspired by movies. And again, growing up in the 80s, it was right before, you know, it got there in terms of like CGI. So like Steven Spielberg, like Goonies, like that, you know. One of my favorite movies is the movie Legend with Tom
Hmm.
Cruise. Um, and that was all done on a set, and it's ridiculous what they did. Like I just love when like sets are so ridiculous. It's like, oh my, but you can see that right away. You know, when you watch it, like the split second you see that, it's like, wow. And I don't know if people appreciate that like I do. I know some do, but like as soon as I see that, I'm like, man, like that's like dedication, and it makes me just appreciate whatever I'm watching more.
Sure.
Um,
I mean, there's this element where, I mean, with CGI, it can only evolve, right? But
right.
with these sets, it's like there are films that were made we'll never be able to do. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Stalker, the Russian film Stalker. There will
Yes,
never be,
yeah.
there'll never be another Stalker. And I don't know if you like
Yep,
Jodorowsky,
Tarkovsky,
like the
he's
Holy
I love
Mountain.
him.
There's
Yeah.
never going to be another Holy Mountain because no one is
Yes.
ever going to be that crazy to build all those kind of sets with that color and make it that elaborate. It just couldn't happen. It just
Right.
could never happen again unless there's some unforeseeable, you know, world.
Yeah.
And that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up Holy Mountain, because I do music videos every so often, and someone just contacted me to do a music video, and Holy Mountain was a reference. So yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's another thing that sort of was very underground and obscure and is now kind of permeated the culture a little bit more. Jodorowsky, I think, is more influential. There would have been like a handful of people who knew who he was back in the day. You know, complete
Exactly.
midnight. The only way to see something like Holy Mountain is to go into Boston at midnight once a year, you know, and go to
Yeah.
an art house movie theater. That was the only way to get the stuff.
Right.
And it's,
Like David Lynch, like Eraserhead,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
You
something
had to
like that.
work.
That was another huge inspiration, you know, and I tried to show a lot of my friends that movie, and they're just 5 minutes into it, they're like, no. But he, you know, David Lynch is another person where he, you know, I really admire his take on art, because even when he's asked about that particular movie, like, what does it mean? What's the meaning? And he's like, it doesn't always have to have like a meaning. And I get asked that a lot about my photos too. It's like, you know, I don't want it to look haphazard, like, oh, I'm just going to throw a chair here and put this here for whatever. For make it look weird for weird's sake. Like, I don't want to do that, but I like when people interpret their own meanings with things. Just it's yeah.
Sure. So in terms
it doesn't always have to have a definitive answer.
Sure. In terms of inspiration, there were two things I wanted to talk to you about. Two other kind of channels. The first is music. It's my understanding you started as a music photographer, and I'm wondering how much of a role that plays in what this eventually evolved into.
Yeah, so it's funny. That's all. I don't even know how I got into that. I think so. I really got into going into concerts when I was in college. I didn't all that much in high school, but in college I got like super into going to concerts. So I used to sneak a camera in, and I think it was more like oh, look how close I was to the band or something. I was a teenager, so just stuff like that was really like cool to me. But when I was sneaking in cameras and taking pictures, I didn't realize that I was essentially like building a portfolio like for concert stuff. So eventually I started asking for photo passes, and I would go to like, I'd go from like sneaking in cameras to going to like the local VFW or something where like anything goes at a show like that, and I would take pictures there. And yeah, so I had like somewhat of a portfolio, and I started asking for photo passes. And so that was the thing with me for almost like 10 years. And I think I did it because growing up, I was a real like wallflower, and I kind of got picked on, and so I felt good getting a photo pass. Like I felt important, like I belonged. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that was like a good reason to be doing it, but I learned a lot about photography while I was doing it. Because those are some pretty, any concert photographers will tell you that those are hard conditions to shoot under.
Yeah, the lighting really teaches you about lighting, right?
Oh, absolutely. And normally, you can't use your flash. So, but after a while, I just kind of got, I don't want to say disenchanted with it, but in terms of creativity, I felt like I had hit the roof. It's like, all right, I'm doing live photos, but it's not like I can like go up on stage and like start positioning people,
Yeah.
So one of my friends one day, he was just like, why don't you just start, shooting portraits? And for some reason I had never been interested in that. But I started doing that, and it just kind of overtook the concert photography thing. But it's funny because nowadays I get offers for, different commissions that are really cool, like music videos and album covers that I wish I would have gotten back when I was like deep into that scene. But the funny thing is that the reason why I'm getting contacted about it now is because of my work now. It's not because of any of the work I did in the music scene. It's because all the like fine art kind of like surreal photos I do. So it's just funny thinking about how things come back around full circle, I guess.
Yeah, I love rock photography. I love band photography, and I'm not even sure why. It's a little bit of a mystery to me, and I think it has to do. I mean, we can plumb my psychology all you want. Who knows? But there's this added pleasure, or there's this added sense of depth to it as you get older. So, for example, I had a picture of the Sex Pistols up on my wall when I was in high school. All right, and it was a cool picture, and I was fascinated by it for whatever reason. It's a completely different experience now. Why? Because to me, they look like a bunch of kids. Like there was this band that like changed the world and were so controversial and blah 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 everything. But it's like clearly like 4 teenagers just kind of messing around right now. So there's this kind of sense of loss, or this sense of change, or this sense of lost time. There's a kind of ghost quality to it as well. So the fact of time changes band photography, right? Like if you see a picture of Leo Sayer from the 1970s, or it doesn't matter who it is. It can be the Deftones, a picture of the Deftones from 15 years ago. It's a very different feeling than seeing it, a week after it was shot.
Yeah, and it's like, it's relatable too. I mean, you go in and out of relating to it and maybe not. I actually love Deftones, and they've aged very well. Because they came out in kind of like the new metal era, but yeah, I love them. I think, oh, and they've like kind of reinvented themselves too over the years, and I think that's important. But yeah, I mean, with concert photography too, that like you said, there's like an undeniable energy while you're there that you're sharing with the band, that you're sharing with other people. So, and I love that, and I still the whole crowd thing is hard for me sometimes. So, if you're someone that has like crowd anxiety, but yeah,
Sure. Well, going in the other direction, the other influence I wanted to ask you about, and I have no idea, it wasn't in the piece we did in Merrimack Valley Magazine, but I wanted to ask, and I wanted to talk about dreams, because there's a dream-like aspect to a lot of your photography, and I'm wondering, do you have vivid dreams? Do you remember your dreams? Are you inspired by your dreams at all?
yeah, so I actually have super vivid dreams, to the point where I'm always like, should I go to a sleep specialist or something? Because, if I have like a quote unquote bad dream, it's like really bad. Like it will really mess up my day. Like I'll think about it all day. Like, man, like it just leaves like a weird, awkward, like lingering feeling. But yeah, I have like really vivid dreams, and I do write stuff down a lot. But yeah, it's strange because I've had people message me too, like over specific photos, and they'll be like, I had a dream that looked exactly like this image, like exactly. And I'm just like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't know. I think it's like some people don't dream. I just read something about that a couple years ago, which is really strange. Or if they do, they can't remember it. But I think for those of us, that do dream a lot, that can remember it, it kind of like lingers with you and it sticks with you, and it's almost like going into like another world. It's different from seeing pictures. Like, say you wanted to go on vacation to some, Paris. Being in Paris and seeing pictures of it is two totally different things, because you can't your body can't feel what it feels like to be in Paris. You know what I mean? So I think dreams for everyone has this weird universal feeling that you either know that feeling and you know that someone's bringing it back and maybe, writing about it or making a visual about it, or you just don't get it, So yeah, it's strange, but I definitely, and there's certain things I do with my photos too that, for example, and I always get a lot of negative feedback about how, like, when I shoot on location or just anywhere, the windows in my photos are blown out, they're overexposed. So a lot of photographers that are technical will be like, well, that your window's not properly exposed, but it's like, I don't want people, especially if like I'm in an abandoned house, I don't want people to be able to look out that properly exposed window and see like a Walmart on the corner. You know what I mean? It takes away from that whole, like, what time period of is this? Where is this? So I play with my lighting in a way that isn't technically right, by most photography standards, to make it look, I guess, kind of surreal. Um, yeah, it's all about using light, I guess, when I think about it, to get kind of like that dreamlike feeling.
When you have people, you mentioned that someone or people have said, "Hey, I had this, saw this image in a dream." What do you make of that? Do you think it reflects on some type of like collective unconscious mind, or do you think it's just random, or what do you
Yeah,
think's going on there?
it's weird too, because when they contact me, they're more like kind of freaked out. Like, it's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. I don't have a machine that like I could probe people and know what they're thinking. But it's very strange, and usually I don't know what to say back to them. I'll just be like, oh, cool. Like I'll usually tell them like where the photo was taken, or, who's in the photo, because I feel like that makes them feel a little bit better. But they're usually just like, this is crazy. Like, this looks like, this one guy, I had a photo of an astronaut, like levitating, like jumping up in the air, and it was like in an old room, and there was like TVs around them. And a few months ago, a guy messaged me on Instagram and he was like, I had this dream as a kid. It was like a reoccurring dream. And he was just like all freaked out, but he didn't really ask anything. Or it's like he just had to tell me, and I was just like, I don't know. It's strange. Yeah, I am really into that, like, what vibrations are and frequencies, and are some of us on the same frequency? And I mean, there's so many questions I have that will never be answered. But yeah, it's strange. Like I somehow feel like people that create in any form, even people that create, like if you're just doing doodles at your desk or something, I sometimes feel like there's a reason for it. Like there's a reason for why we all do that. Just as a form of communication or something. I mean, you got to think, I think before there was spoken language, there was writing on walls in caves, so it's strange thinking about that. I think it's communication, but we're just not understanding where we're getting the message and why we're doing it. Because I get asked that a lot, like, where do you get your ideas? And something, I can get ideas from listening to music or reading books or whatever, but for me it's like 80% of the time I can't really tell you.
Yeah,
Like,
this
I wish I
reminds
had
me.
a good answer, but
Yeah, right, and it's funny because it points to like a difference between the way the art world works and maybe like the music world works. Like somebody like Bob Dylan used to always say, like, I don't write these songs. I just kind of am like an instrument. They come through me. Like it's not my
right.
will. I'm not deciding I'm going to write this line. I'm just like the mouth of something bigger than me.
Yes,
But there's
exactly.
something in
Yeah,
art
like the
school, I think, where you
antenna.
have to like articulate every little thing and every little intention and say, I'm doing this to, I don't know, thwart the patriarchy or to invert people's grammar about this or that. And,
Right.
to say like, I don't know, like it's just coming through me. It's these ideas. I'm just an instrument. I'm just a funnel or like like I'm just vibrating with these ideas. Where do they come from? Who knows?
Right. Yeah. And I feel like that, a lot of the time that answer isn't particularly what people are looking for. I think sometimes they want to hear the whole, like, oh, well, I got this cabin in the middle of the woods on top of Mount Everest. And like, but, and which I wouldn't be able to do. Like, I wouldn't be able to be like, you know what, I'm going on vacation next week to think about stuff, because then I'm forcing myself to think of stuff. And yeah, it's just a very weird process, I guess. And that's not to say, like, I get commissioned for stuff where I have to come up with stuff. But that's where I got the idea. If someone commissions me, they usually tell me what they want. So yeah, it's strange.
So I have two big questions to ask before I turn it over to Lou, because Lou always has some questions. The first thing, I'm wondering if the sense of your work has changed during the pandemic because of the pandemic. In other words, you have a lot of stuff that's like isolated and stark, and there's like sort of a faceless, timeless quality. Does that feel different because of what we've been through over the past year? Do you see things going on that just wouldn't have been so stark if we hadn't experienced this pandemic?
Yeah, so it's strange because, career-wise this year, I'd say I've probably done the best I have. I mean, I'm definitely scared that a lot of my avenues, like I make a lot of my income vending at events, which we all know that events aren't happening right now. So, but in terms of like people recognizing my work and getting the recognition from, I've been doing this since, like, taking photos since 2003. So it's been a long, like, grueling process. It's hard sometimes, but it's very strange that this year, because of what's happening, people that otherwise I don't think would understand my work are now looking at it and they're like, oh my God, like, now I feel what that photo is all about, because we've literally all been living it. But the funny thing is, like, my astronaut series, I started that because I just had this vision one day of like, oh man, like, I wonder if it's like environmental stuff. I think I was just thinking about the environment, and I was like, I wonder if at some point, maybe like 1,000 years from now, which I don't think would be too far fetched, like we can't live here anymore. So I had this vision of like, if we can't live here anymore, say we go to another planet and we colonize Mars or something, someone decides to come back, and just like me going into like abandoned houses to kind of just see how people lived back then, that someone comes back to Earth and they want to see how people lived. So yeah, it's just very strange that I was thinking like that's how that kind of came to be. And then this year happened, and it's like the whole face mask, and the astronaut is wearing obviously like the helmet so they can breathe. And um so I started doing a lot of astronaut photos like just around Manchester where I live, and like in front of restaurants, just to kind of gain awareness too of like, hey everyone, like you can still, like, don't let this restaurant flounder. You can still, you don't have to eat in it if you're uncomfortable. You can like get takeout or whatever, because I can't imagine being a business like that in the past year. It's terrible. So I started doing photos like that around Manchester, and I got really good feedback. But when the pandemic first started, I wasn't taking photos of anyone. Like obviously there's always someone in the astronaut suit. It's usually a friend of mine. And but for like months I wasn't, coming into contact with anyone at all. And I ordered a bunch of mannequins on Amazon. So I would dress up the mannequins, but then I was like, what do I do with their faces? You can tell it's a mannequin. Like you can dress them up to look like a person, but they still have, the blank face or whatever. So I started sculpting masks. So a lot of I came up with a lot of things during the pandemic that I probably wouldn't have done if that never happened. So it was kind of a blessing and a curse. It forced me to definitely do a lot of newer things, like where I shoot and how I shoot and the frequency of it and how I build sets. Like I don't know if you can see it. There's like whoops, right there, the little green set that I did. I started doing like forced perspective sets where instead of building like a massive life-size sets, I would do like a tinier one in the front that's like probably 3 by 4-ish feet wide, not even. And I would do so it looked like the foreground was life size, but it's not. It's just kind of like an optical illusion. So
So before my last question, where do people find out more? What's your website? Where can they buy prints? What are the details for people who want to find out more about your photography?
Yeah, so my website is KarenJerzykPhoto.com. Because my name is pretty, I mean, not a lot of people have the last name Jerzik. So even if you like Google search my name, you can find like my Instagram is like Karen.Jerzyk.photo. But yeah, you can Google search my name and find, and I have everything linked off my website as well. So
yeah, and you sell prints at Hive Forge down in Lowell.
yeah.
You say you've done okay and sort of survived this pandemic, at least financially. I'm surprised at how affordable your stuff is, because you're on my radar. I read obviously the article and edited the article that was in the January issue, and I was looking at it. I'm like, oh, that's like I can do that. Like there's a lot of art that's like, oh, like you don't want to look at the price tag. But your prints are very affordable. Is that a conscious decision you made to like, hey, I'm going to make this so that someone who's interested in this can buy it without having to, feel too guilty about it?
Yeah, people always tell me too, they're like, you got to raise your prices. And I get that for some things, but I would never want to deny anyone that likes my work to not be able to own a piece of my work just because, I'm jacking the prices up to a ridiculous amount. So I think it is really important to me to have affordable prints because not to the point where it's burying me financially, but like, if I can stay afloat and people can buy my prints because, usually they're buying them because they mean something to them. there's some art that it's like, oh, this just looks cool and I want it. I think with mine, a lot of people like attach themselves to it in some way, like it reminds them of something or someone or a place they've been. So yeah, that's really important to me. Like for me, again, bringing up movies, like I don't know what I would do if a movie was like $100. Just, I mean, it's getting there. Who even knows now? But if it was $100 to see a movie that I really wanted to see and I couldn't see it because I can't afford to go for that amount, So I kind of see it in that sense where, yeah, I think everyone deserves to experience, other people's work and not let it get ruined by, only having like, oh, I just want people that are, really financially lucrative to be able to own my work.
So, so before I ask Lou if he has questions, you have to tell us about the spacesuit. How did you get the spacesuit, and what's the story of the spacesuit that we see in your photographs?
Yeah, so I bought that. It was made by China for the Russians around 1964. And I know this specific bit of information because I was watching Pawn Stars one day and someone brought in like the same suit. I was like, oh my God, that's the suit I have. So like there's like a surplus of them like floating around there like on eBay. And so it's like a high altitude suit. So the original one I got, it was the actual helmet, which I've always kept the same helmet, but the bodysuit part was green. You'll notice in some of the pictures it's green, and it was just so small. Like it's all corseted too, because when you're up that high, you need to like get the blood flowing to your head. So like the whole body is corseted. And I was actually having trouble finding people tiny enough to fit in it. So then I ended up just getting like a white snowsuit that happened to look. I was like, oh, that works for an astronaut suit. So that's why some are like green suits and some are white. And yeah, I travel all over with that thing. It's like 30 pounds. So it gets pretty cumbersome sometimes. Like the first time I brought it on a flight, I brought the helmet with me as my one of my carry-ons because like I don't want to lose the helmet. Like I can deal with losing the suit, but the helmet was like the big ticket item in terms of the price. So I tweeted TSA on Twitter and I was like, hey, can I bring like this high altitude helmet? And it was amazing because they said something like, it was something like, you absolutely can have a fun blast off, like referring to an astronaut. I was like, okay, that's cool. But I was just afraid, like, if I brought that helmet on, they'd be like, what is this? What are you doing?
Sure. Lou, questions?
Yeah, you guys pretty much gutted my question list with talking about the astronaut series, especially because I was wondering who was in the astronaut suit. But I want to talk about the astronaut series because I want to go another level because you have invested a lot of creativity into it, and I understand the suit is an investment and it creates tremendous opportunities. And we all talked about how we love music. And the thing about music is, great music is the lyrics are interpretable to the person listening to them. And I get a whole different feel from the astronaut series. I got a feeling of isolation. I got a feeling of tourist in my own life type of theme to it. Is that something you go for in your photography where you like people to be able to interpret themselves into what they're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. My main goal with what I do in terms of the viewer, a viewer looking at my work is that to me, it's a win if someone is able to stand in front of one of my pictures or look at it online or whatever, and they don't just scroll past it or just walk away from it. That when they're looking at it, there's some sort of story to be told. And, going back to there's not really an answer to any of my photos or there's not really a specific story behind it. Yeah, it's whatever the viewer makes of it. So I feel like it's my job for what I'm doing to create something that can be looked at and can hold someone's attention and allow them to think of a meaning behind the picture or, somehow attach themselves to it or, to be able to, I guess, relate with it in some sort of way.
There's a lot of spirituality in that series, it seems to me, about isolation from the world, the person, the consciousness being isolated from the world. Or is that just me dropping my own interpretation on it?
No, that's definitely, I mean, I think that comes a lot just from how I feel as a person, how I've always felt. I always feel isolated, like I could be in a room of 100 people and still feel, like I don't fit in or feel like I'm alone.
Yeah, see, that's what I was guessing. I was guessing there's some autobiography in there.
Something I struggle with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I that comes out in my photos a lot. I mean, with what I do now, I mean, my photos, the surreal stuff I do, I mean, that started off as pretty much therapy, because in 2011 my father passed away, and that's kind of when I stopped doing concert photos, because I needed, that him passing away, it was unexpected, so I was in bad shape for a while, and I needed some sort of therapy, and it just so happens that doing the photos and the kind of ritual of building a costume and making a character and going to the location, and that turned into actually building sets once I had a studio. But it was almost like a ritual that was calming, and it made me feel better. It was definitely therapy. So yeah, a lot of what I do is very emotional, which is hard when they say don't read the comments on the internet, but yeah, I mean, it's especially hard, and I think for anyone, when you put stuff out there and someone has something negative to say, but especially when it comes from such an emotional place, it's stabbing me right in the heart.
Let me ask you some technical questions, because you said you don't use Photoshop and you build some sets and you're looking for things. This particular shot, in front of me, I'm guessing that's not all natural lighting, so there's some addition here, but it's hard to do the addition to the lighting in a large set like that, a large photo that doesn't allow you to get lighting close. What goes on what's into the lighting in this picture?
So that's pretty much, I changed the coloring, maybe a little color tweaking, but that was pretty much it. That was interesting. That was actually a month ago. That photo's fairly new, and that's in Manchester. And I had already done a few rounds of doing astronaut photos in Manchester. So the foundry, the building's actually owned by Dean Kamen. He's the one that invented the Segway. He's actually his place is right across my studio. He's working on something called Army right now, ARMI, and they're 3D printing organs. Not to get too far, but you're talking about science fiction, they're 3D printing organs right across the street. I always tell people, and they look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, no, this is really happening. They have a robot that delivers mail that they created there. But he owns that building, and the foundry is a restaurant, and someone that worked there messaged me on Facebook, and she was like, hey, I think I can get you up on the roof of the foundry. I can just ask the manager. And I was like, absolutely. Yes, that would be amazing. Cause how else would there's no way I'd be able to sneak up there without permission. So, yeah, that's on the roof. And there was these weird hatches we had to climb up. I expected just normal stairs going up there, and it wasn't. Yeah, I'm probably dating myself, but have you guys seen Money Pit with
Sure.
Tom Hanks?
Yeah.
So when the staircase is out and they're trying to bring they have the ladder going up to the second floor and they're trying to drag buckets up and stuff. It was like that, where it was a ladder up against the wall, and there was two of them. So I had the astronaut suit in this giant IKEA bag, trying to climb the ladder with my camera. But yeah, that particular picture, there's really not a lot of Photoshop going on other than minor color correction.
Oh God, that makes it even better, because it's such a great piece. I mean,
that sign, I use that neon sign pretty much as the light source, and that's why I never used to shoot at night. And then I just randomly, from going to New York City a lot, and you mentioned Chinatown before. I love Chinatown. just throwing this out there, if anyone's in Chinatown in New York City, check out Doyers Street, Doyers. It's incredible. But I just got like really obsessed with like neon signs because like I realized they act as a light source, like just as a giant light source. And it seems like, oh, well, that's obvious, but you know, for photo wise, it's not so obvious that, I mean, just the way they light things up, I just love the different colors and stuff. And it does give off that like super like sci-fi kind of feel.
And last one for me, are you getting requests for the astronaut now? Are people saying, bring the astronaut and shoot at my place or shoot her in my neighborhood?
They actually do, especially now because I've been doing it in front of restaurants and everything, which is really cool because, you know, and that's just fun for me. And like I said, especially nowadays, if I can help an establishment kind of bring more attention to them to get more sales or whatever, and I get to keep the photos and do what I want with them, that's cool with me. You know, I'm not saying like, oh, I do everything for free, but you know, especially nowadays, like it's just kind of like helping each other out in that aspect. So yeah, I mean, yeah, if anyone asks me, or even like, I love little convenience stores like corner stores and stuff like that. I just kind of like everyday places that I never used to pay much attention to, that in the past few years I'm like, these look really cool. Like these can look like sci-fi if I play my cards right with like the lighting and everything. So
last question before we wrap up. What's next? What are you working on now?
So we're actually renovating one of our studio rooms, so that's going to take a couple months, but we're turning it into like a really retro like living room, bedroom, bathroom, stuff like that. But we're also doing that so if people need a place to like film or shoot, that they can rent that out for us from us. But yeah, there's that. I've gotten into the NFT world where it's this is a whole other ball of wax, but I'll be quick with it. It's like artists uploading their work. It's all digital and it's on the blockchain, and it's so super new. If anyone wants to learn about it, you can go to like nftbible.com, and it's basically a way of just you know, like if I upload a photo, it's minted on the blockchain, and that's saying like it's the only photo. It's kind of like putting like a thumbprint on a photo. So whatever work you upload, you can do like one of one or like one of 10, but because you're you know, you're kind of attaching that minting to it, that's saying it's like, you know, kind of rare. I don't know. It's it's that whole like cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so it's like a Bitcoin, but with art.
Yes, yeah, and it's bought and sold with like cryptocurrency. So that's something I've actually been looking into the past couple months. And I guess my point of mentioning that is it's a very, very digital. Like there's not many photographers doing that right now. It's very like super like just digitized moving images or like photos. So I'm trying to not conform to that, but right now I'm in the process of thinking of different ways I can shoot and kind of like fit into that world a little bit better. So I'll probably be doing like video clips, and again, it's me looking at the work that's there and saying, how can I do this in real life? Because I don't know how to digitally render anything or like draw digitally or whatever. So yeah, so I'm kind of like working on doing really different stuff to kind of like put out there in that whole universe of weirdness with, you know, but yeah, there's that. And I still do the astronaut stuff all the time. And I'm traveling to Virginia in a couple months to do some astronaut stuff. So in a place where it's like all presidents' heads, it's like, it was like this theme park that was supposed to, I don't even know if it opened, but there's like 100 or so presidents' heads, and they're massive, like the size of like small houses. Like it's really, I don't even know. I think my friend told me about it. So just random stuff like that.
I will look forward to seeing it on Instagram.
Yeah,
or
definitely.
images on Instagram. I feel like we've just kind of scratched the surface. There's a lot. This is one of those interviews where it's like I have a lot of things in the margins of my notes that I didn't get to.
Yeah.
So maybe you'll come back on at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you mind? Yeah,
this is. Let me know whenever.
Absolutely. This is great. Our guest today was Karen Jerzyk, photographer from Manchester. Karen, thank you so much for coming on the 495. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I will see everybody next week.
See you later.
Yeah, take care.